Chapter 40. War and Peace. In spite of the fact that actual fighting took place more than 3,000 miles away, it will take many years to form a just estimate of the tremendous effect of the world convulsion upon this city, for significant things have happened to New York since 1914. During the 2 nervous years of neutrality following Germany's invasion of Belgium, New York, as the vast port through which went food, supplies, and ammunition to the belligerents, watched civic disturbances increase along with its wealth. There were bomb plots and rumors of bomb plots, strikes for higher wages, strikes for shorter hours, strikes for better working conditions. On the 7th of May, 1915, when the Lusitania was torpedoed by a German submarine and sank, she carried to the bottom many New Yorkers, among them Alfred G. Vanderbilt and Charles Frohman. And so through all the talk of peace, there sounded the sinister rumbles of war. Citizens held a preparedness parade, and President Wilson, accompanied by Secretary Daniels, came to review the United States fleet at anchor in the Hudson River. A 30-foot channel, authorized by the federal government, was dug through Hell Gate from Long Island Sound to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for the passage of battle cruisers, and even the German merchant submarine, the Deutschland, came a-marketing to this port. During this period, when war was thundering on hundreds of miles of European battlefronts, the United States at large was undoubtedly prospering, and New York to a higher degree than ever before in its history. At the close of 1916, the stock exchange was transacting the greatest volume of business in 15 years. American exports passing through the port were fairly doubling those of other years, and the city's requisition of stamps from the Post Office Department for the year 1917 alone, if placed in a single stack, would have reached to 4 times the height of the Washington Monument. The Schoharie Reservoir of the Monmouth Catskill Water Project was opened in 1917, and by 1924, when the Gilboa Dam and the Shandaken Tunnel, the world's longest, were complete, the city had executed an engineering feat rivaling the Panama Canal itself. But in the meanwhile, the approach of conflict was more and more unmistakable. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war upon Germany, and New York revived its ancient role as shipbuilder under the direction of Charles M. Schwab, and entered upon the heart-rending task of seeing off to the front the fighting men of 17. Then followed the wheatless and heatless days, lightless nights, and finally motorless Sundays. The city's troubles were increased by longshoremen's strikes, fires of incendiary origin, and the scourge of the Spanish influenza. For the duration of the war, work was suspended on all churches, hotels, schools, theaters, and other public buildings, and New York bent its energies toward sending well over the top each of the 5 successful Liberty Loan drives, furnishing about 1/4 of the total sum of the country's war expenditure. Such citizens as John D. Ryan, Albert Rathbone, Albert Strauss, Rodman Wanamaker, and Elihu Root were called into executive positions, while, on the other hand, among the war's casualties, ex-Mayor Mitchell lost his life on the aviation field at Lake Charles, an event mourned by the entire city. On November 7, 1918, an erroneous press cable message received at New York about 1:00 p.m. set all the sirens and bells to shrieking in a wild delirium of joy. Extras rushed out with the headline, "Germany surrenders, the war is over." But already the wild celebration of New York's false Armistice Day was in full swing. Schools were dismissed, and all business stopped. Everything that could make a noise, from a paper-covered comb to a steam whistle, added its voice to the city's uproar. Apparently, with one accord, dozens of downtown office buildings began to dump the contents of wastebaskets from thousands of windows. At times, the air was darkened by the dense paper snowfall, which piled up deep underfoot, and literally miles of ticker tape were sent spinning from innumerable brokers' windows to cling in gigantic paper cobwebs to the tall buildings. Fifth Avenue for at least 3 miles was jammed solidly from curb to curb with dancing, shrieking humanity. Sedate old gentlemen smashed their derbies and turned their overcoats inside out, and refined ladies went about kissing every uniformed man they met. On a balcony of the Knickerbocker Hotel appeared Caruso, waving a flag and singing the Star-Spangled Banner to probably his only audience that ever was too thrilled by its own emotions to listen. By evening, when the news was denied, reality, strangely enough, could not destroy New York's high spirits and hope. From then until November 11th, the time was spent in eager anticipation of peace. Word of the signing of the armistice came through at 3 o'clock that morning, and searchlights and sirens announced it to the city. Once more people gathered, but this time a little more deliberately, to celebrate the return of peace. In 1919, wave after wave of the returning divisions of American soldiers, sailors, Marines passed through New York, and not one failed to receive its royal welcome. On February 17th, to the blare of Jim Europe's jazz band, the 369th Infantry, the old 15th Colored, marched up Fifth Avenue to Harlem, its home, the only New York organization that had served throughout under its own state colors. It carried 191 citations for individual gallantry. The Croix de Guerre had been bestowed upon its colors for signal bravery during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, while through the courtesy of the French, it had been the first regiment of the Allies to reach the Rhine. For the welcome of New York's own, the 27th Division, an outgrowth of the old National Guard, a grand stand was erected from 60th Street to 110th Street, and on March 25th, 5 miles of soldiers, under such perfect discipline that they seemed all unconscious of the tumult about them, ignoring the shower of blossoms, fruit, and banknotes, marched behind Major General John F. Orion in what has been called the grimness that won rather than the jubilation of victory. A huge arch of victory, with a court of the heroic dead, spanned their way at Madison Square, and another, an arch of jewels, at 59th Street. The largest crowd that had ever gathered in New York sought places along the line of march from daybreak on. Gold stars, 1,972 of them, indicated what gaps there were in the columns that filed past the reviewing stand where Governor Alfred E. Smith and other public officials stood. Overhead circled airplanes, at one time as many as 5. The 77th Division, with its Chinese standard-bearer, typifying the racial diversity that made it also New York's own, the product of a city which reads its newspapers in 21 languages, which has more Irish than Dublin, more Italians than any city but Rome, and which contains the largest Jewish population in the world, came back on May 6th. Then the final great outburst of welcoming fervor was lavished on General Pershing, as he led the famous 1st Division, 25,000 strong, through an avenue strewn deep with laurel and flower petals. Above the pealing of church bells and the triumphant music of bands rose shouts for the great popular war leader. With drums muffled and colors dipped for the dead, the division swept through the Victory Arch, and on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral, Cardinal Mercier of Belgium stood beside Cardinal Hayes, then Archbishop, to watch the city's last great parade for its returning soldiers, a parade which Pershing declared was the most enthusiastic, patriotic outburst that could be imagined.